Now that you're a little bit more familiar with Adobe Animate and creating animations, we're going to add buttons to our animations using code snippets so that we can control when it stops and when it starts. The first thing we need to do is to create a button. So we're going to go to Insert, New Symbol. We're going to name that symbol. I'm going to go ahead and name this one Play Button because that's the first button that I'm going to create. We want to make sure that the type is set to button and not movie clip or graphic. It will be saved in our library. We can click OK. Now we have a new stage and a new timeline. Our timeline has some commands like up, over, down, and hit. Up is what our button will look like before it's pressed. Over is what it will look like when we mouse over it. Down is what it will look like when it's clicked. And hit is when the button strikes an object in your animation or your mouse. So the first thing I'm going to do is import some of the shapes that I've downloaded. So I'm going to import to stage. I'm going to choose the triangle, and this is going to make my play button. So I'm going to go ahead and resize it since it's obviously way too large. So I'm going to go to Modify and Free Transform. Get my control boxes and size that for what I'd like to have in my animation. I'm going to go ahead and rotate it so that it looks like a standard play button. And now I'm going to add a little bit of color to it. I'm going to zoom in on my image, choose a color. I'm going to go with blue, then grab the brush, and I'm going to fill in my triangle. Now since we're working with a border, we can color inside the triangle and get a little bit over the edges without worrying about it showing on our final animation. I'll finish filling it in here. And when I'm done, I can click the back button, go back to my animation, click on the library icon, and I can see that my icon has, or my button has now been added to the library. So now I'm going to go back and create my stop button by going to Insert Symbol again. I'm going to name it Stop_Button. Make sure the type is set to button, and the library is where it will save, and click OK. Now we once again have a new stage and a new timeline. And this time I'm going to import a square clip art that I downloaded to make my stop button. It's obviously too big, so I'll go ahead and resize it again by going to Modify, Free Transform. I'll zoom in on it and go ahead and add some color. Now that my buttons are finished, I can go to the library and I can see my play button and my stop button. Now that we've got buttons, we need to add them to our animation. So first I'm going to add a layer for my play button, and I'm going to call it Play Button Layer. And then I'm going to add a layer for the stop button. Call it Stop Button Layer. And now I've got two layers to lay my buttons onto instead of putting them into one of my animation layers. So I'm going to put the stop button on the stop layer and move it to where it looks a little bit better. And I'm going to put my play button on the play layer. Alright, so now that I've got my buttons, if I preview the video, I can see that I've got my buttons there, but right now they don't do anything. I can click on them and they're just there. So I need to add some actions to those buttons. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Window and choose Code Snippets so that I've got my Code Snippets window available. Click on Action Scripts. And since we're working with the timeline, I'm going to use timeline navigation. Now, I don't want my animation to constantly loop, since that would eliminate the need of a play button. So I need to add an actions layer so that I can assign actions to these buttons. You need to call it actions with a capital A, and Adobe Animate will automatically know that this is where my actions will be assigned. The first code snippet I'm going to use is the stop command. I want the stop command on the very first frame of my animation. This will prevent my animation from looping, so when we use the play button, it's actually going to play and not just continually loop. Alright, so now I need to assign a code snippet to the play button. Now if I attempt to do that, I'm going to get an error from Adobe Animate. The reason for this is because Adobe needs to know what to assign a code snippet to. So we have to be very specific. So I've got my play button selected and I need to assign it an instance name. And that instance name needs to be different than every other name that I've used for it, like the name for it in the layer or the file name. So I'm going to call it play button puppy. Okay. And then I'm going to name the stop button stop _ button _ puppy. Now that they have an instance name and Adobe can separate them from each other, I can assign code snippets to them. So to my play button, I'm going to assign the go to frame and play. And if we look at the code, we can see what it's going to do. Play button puppy has had an event listener added to it, and it's listening to the mouse event click. So the play button, when I click, will go ahead and execute this code, and it's going to go to and play at frame 5. I'm going to change that to frame 2, since that's where my animation begins. Do not change the number above, because Adobe Animate assigns that to individual code snippets. So we don't want to change anything that Animate has to put in the code to be able to execute. We're only going to change what's between the brackets. So let's try it. Awesome. Looks like my play button works. So now I'm going to go ahead and assign code snippet to the stop button. So for the stop button, since Adobe Animate doesn't have a specific stop other than the stop at this frame, I'm going to use the go to next frame and stop. So in this case, once again, we're adding an event listener to stop button puppy. The listener is click, and it will stop automatically at the next frame. So let's try it again. So now I have a play button, and I can stop it anywhere in the animation. So now we've created 2 action buttons for our animation. So instead of running in a loop, now the viewer has the option to stop and play at any point. So now that we've learned how to do that, I'm going to go back for just a moment and I'm going to show you how to create a button from scratch. I imported some clip art for my buttons, but you can always create a symbol, name it. I'm going to call it scratch button. Make sure the type is set to button. Click OK. And now we can simply just choose a shape. I'm going to choose a rectangle. I can put it in the center of my stage. And I'm going to select it and give it a little bit more of an interesting color. So I can go to my palette. I'm going to choose a blue gradient. And now I've got a new button that I've created from scratch. Now I can get a little bit creative with it, and I can go to my library. I can grab that, and I can drag it anywhere onto my animation. I'm not going to create a layer for this one. I'm just going to go ahead and set it here. But if I were to go ahead and use it in my animation, I would want that on a separate layer. Now I'd like you to go back and choose one of the animations that you've created, add a play button, and then instead of adding a stop button, add a next frame and a previous frame button. Have fun!